Hello and welcome to Deep in Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Arbo's most diabolical work, 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Histories, Arc 5, 5.x, however you want to refer to it. The interlude for Arc 5.
Yeah.
And this interlude starts out and it's clearly like it does some real work setting us back into the past. I think the first or second sentence we see people with bowler hats and then there's horses and carriages, and it really just gets you in this kind of dirty Sherlock Holmes London era, which is very fun.
Yeah, you're immediately thinking of like Victorian era London, and yeah, I think you're right. I think Sherlock Holmes is specifically name dropped later in the chapter, which just feels like it's perfect. Yeah,
yeah, it's a fun setting. Obviously Pact is kind of modern supernatural setting, but it does put you in that kind of gothic Victorian setting, which is I always liked for supernatural stuff.
Yeah, well, that gothic horror period has really defined modern supernatural, so it feels so natural to have something like Pact drop in there for a little bit. If you think about modern horror type stuff, like we're still very much defined by the sorts of ghost stories and Frankenstein and Dracula that were big back then. And so it's almost like a bit of an homage to its roots in a way for Pact to highlight the time period a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And we see that we're following a man and his familiar. What we find out is his familiar. Who are looking to find somebody or somebodies. A man and a woman, and there's this kind of vague sense of there's going to be some conflict here. Something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, I actually really like the vagueness of this quest at the start. Like, throughout the first whole half of this chapter, we're slowly learning more and more about, like, Joseph's quest, and from his perspective, he's very much set up as like your classic like hero, like, and so as we learn, he's on this classic heroic quest to save a girl who's being like, kept prisoner by her evil father.
Yeah, it gives me very Sweeney Todd vibes, actually.
It's so just like he views himself as the archetypical hero, and I think the more we learn, the more I'm starting to suspect that was not at all an accurate read on the situation.
Yeah.
Especially what we get right at the end. It's very horror-awesome.
Yeah. One of the things I like about the setup in this chapter as well is it's the man, Joseph, and another man that is always referred to as the companion or the familiar, and it's very much like, what the fuck's going on with this guy? He's very vague. There's a line here where he says, "Rest easy," the man's companion said. "You have me here." And it's this line of like, who, or more likely, what is this thing? Like, it's such a vague, cool setup.
Yeah, well, I think that line you've pulled is actually the first line that the companion is mentioned in. And there's just something about the way it's just like the man's companion. Like, it would have just said the man if he was human. So immediately when it says the man's companion, you're already sort of thinking, okay, what is this guy?
It feels companion. Very other with a lowercase o.
And then very quickly, I think it is established that he's the familiar, but there's still that sense of what's his deal, though?
Yeah. This companion to me is also a great example of just like a really fun side character. He seems really like down to earth. Like Joseph is, he sees himself as this hero, right? He's on a bit of a hero's quest here. And this companion is the one who's like kind of dealing with the reality of the situation and trying to kind of ground Joseph a bunch, as well as just being really creepy. Very fun.
He has that line about, why are you going to such lengths? And Joseph's like, what a ridiculous question. And I think we learn later it's not a ridiculous question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. This familiar guy, he contrasts with Evan a lot as well, which I like. Like, Evan is this nice little boy who turned into a bird, and here we have this face-stealing creature that turned into a guy who like staples faces onto his flayed face.
Yep.
And just talks about murder all the time. But I agree with what you said. He comes across as surprisingly down to earth. Like, he's just very matter of factual. Like, yeah, I'm a murder spirit, and like this is the murdering we're gonna have to do. It's not it's not
Yeah,
emotional in any way. It's just like the facts of life. I'm gonna murder
yeah,
some people.
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's very fun. Yeah, there's these weird beats as well where there's a part where there's a boy who like looks at him and kind of freaks out, and I like that you've pulled out this quote where he says, "Oh, the boy was still young enough to be innocent, it seemed," and it's just like this great little beats of this companion being really weird and creepy.
Yeah, well, it also got me thinking, and I'm probably overthinking all this, but like in Maggie's interlude, we saw that Muggles usually can't really process what they're seeing when they see supernatural
Mm,
stuff. And then this boy
yeah.
obviously did, and Joseph makes the point of noting that he's innocent. So I'm wondering if that's like a thing that you sort of, as a human, you lose your innocence, and if that's important. Like we've seen already that things like Barbatorum can be lured by innocence, and I'm wondering if innocence is actually something that can be, well, it's a more defined trait than just this
Mm.
general concept of innocence. Like I wonder if there's more to that word
Yeah,
than you
and
think.
we've also got bits of Rose and Blake who, like there was the scene on the train. I think it was two pals, and somebody seemingly saw Rose, which is obviously something that doesn't happen that much. Maybe that's
Hmm.
like, oh, this was an innocent. I don't know. Definitely a thread that can be kind of picked at there.
Yeah, I may be overreaching, but it feels like something that might come back. I don't know.
Yeah. So the man, Joseph, is looking for a girl. He's trying to rescue a girl. This girl, he finds out, is still with her father, Canfield, who we get the sense is some kind of abusive, just from this early part of the chapter. And
Yeah.
Joseph realizes he's going to have to fight or kill Canfield to free her.
Also, it's interesting because we eventually get the impression like Canfield doesn't seem to like physically or sexually or anything like abuse his daughter. It's almost just
Yeah.
he's incredibly controlling
Yeah.
and isolates her, which I'm not saying that's better or worse, but it's just it's not the impression Joseph first gives you in the way he describes like how awful Canfield is to her in all these various ways.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. It's not. I think it's interesting because I feel like we get the vibe from what Joseph is saying that the daughter's situation is worse than it ends up being. Right.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not a great situation, but we kind of get explicitly confirmed that Canfield isn't legally abusing her. Right. He's not physically or sexually or mentally really abusing her, but Joseph
Yeah.
clearly feels like he is.
Yeah, exactly. You go from this sense of, oh, he's abusing her to, oh, well, he just said that, and yeah, because he's a practitioner, we know he's not lying. It's like, oh, he's not actually physically abusing her. Oh, he's just controlling. And
Yeah.
then that sort of gets undermined later. So there's this real sense of, from Joseph's first impressions of him, we're sort of like, oh, this guy's terrible. And then it's like, oh, well, he's not the most terrible. And then it goes down again to maybe he wasn't even actually that bad. And it's just
Yeah,
Joseph's
yeah,
perspective.
it's interesting. He definitely comes across as villainous when we do meet him, but yeah, yeah,
I think there's room for interpretations onto how bad Canfield probably actually was. Since it's
yeah.
Pact, I'd be willing to believe he is bad. Everyone's bad,
Oh
you
yeah,
know.
totally.
But
um,
yeah,
yeah. So we see there's something I really like about this is we see Joseph doing a bit of magic. He does a location spell to find where the woman is, and he also uses some powder to make people ignore him. And obviously later we learn that this is Fel's grandfather, but I like that this is kind of seeding like very Fel types of magic when you don't immediately know, oh, this is an ancestor of Fel. It makes a reread of this chapter very fun because you're like, oh, these are all things that Fel has done. It makes sense that it's his grandfather.
yeah. I think for me, probably just because of the way we're going through this story, this is the part where I was like, oh, this is probably Fel's ancestor. Because
Mm,
we did get the whole thing from Fel about his ancestors, and then as soon as he started throwing powder around, that it just to me was like, oh, this guy,
that couldn't do for you.
yeah, because we haven't heard about the past or this era of the past that much. So I think my mind just sort of went there because those
Yeah.
things were already on my mind. Yeah,
Yeah, so Joseph makes his way over to the house and finds Canfield, and they they have a bit of a verbal spat before they start fighting. They have a proper practitioner duel. Really, one of the first ones that we've seen where it's a practitioner versus a practitioner, and not like a practitioner versus a familiar or something like that.
Yeah, it was really cool to see two competent and like knowledgeable practitioners sort of throwing everything into a fight, because I don't think that's really anything we've seen before. It's cool.
Yeah, it does feel like a wizard duel, right? It's got a fun vibe. It has a fun vibe for a while until Joseph kind of swears to Canfield that he will see him die. Obviously making quite a strong oath there.
Well, and it's interesting because he gets a bit of a power boost when he does that, which, like I think Blake's mentioned feeling a rush or whatever when he's made promises to Rose.
Yep.
And things, and I just assumed that was more just the power of what he was saying flowing through him, whereas Joseph seems to imply that it actually gives him a boost, which I guess I'm interpreting as the spirits being like, fuck yeah, like drama, like do it.
Yeah, drama,
like, this is dope.
Let's do it, yeah.
Which I guess is something I hadn't really processed that was maybe happening, is the spirits kind of, it's another way of getting a reward from the spirits for doing something dramatically.
Well, it is a reward, but obviously it's a double-edged sword, as we'll find out in a bit.
Yes.
Joseph, actually, with this power boost, seems like he's actually going to win. His familiar kind of comes in and pulls some cool tricks, and Canfield almost is completely beaten until Canfield pulls out his final trick. He summons Conquest, the Lord of Toronto, and offers him, his body in exchange for victory here and taking care of his daughter.
Yeah, because he's already been stabbed in the gut a bunch, so he's basically, I think he knows he's going to die, so this is a kind of a way to win without winning, I guess.
Yeah.
But, there's another cool bit where one of the things Joseph uses is like a rusty ring, and he uses a rust spirit, and he talks for a bit about how it's a moderate spirit, which I'm still not fully sure I understand exactly what that means, but he says that they're relatively new and more common, and so presumably they have more to do with things that are manufactured. And I guess I can't help but think that this is another sort of a thing, because we're learning that maybe spirits that have to do with manufactured or man-made things are kind of new and slightly different. And that bodes well for people who want to maybe change the way big things to do with spirits work, because it shows evidence that the nature of the spirits around the world can change more than just like what they're associated with, but the nature of the things they're associated with changes the spirits a bit too. Like I feel like that could be important.
This is something that we've kind of touched on a bit just incidentally throughout the past arc or so. The idea of the human world changing and impacting the spirits, and this is a pretty good example of a way that's shown to be possible to be happening.
But this goes to a deeper level than I'd actually expected, because obviously I would expect, there'd be less tree spirits and more paper spirits as we, tear down the Amazon to make like paper and furniture and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's something different about the spirits of these manufactured materials, and that's probably important, I would imagine. And they were already seeing it, 100 or whatever years ago.
Yeah. It's a good point. I guess it makes sense that, a tree spirit, for example, doesn't die and a paper spirit replaces it, but a tree spirit like adapts into a paper spirit, right? Whereas these are seemingly different, a different class of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between spirits and like molecular physics is something I don't still have a firm grasp on, and I probably won't, because that'd be kind of weird to drill that far into it. I think Pact is a much more symbolic universe, and it probably doesn't make sense to go that deep into how spirits work mechanically, but yeah.
So Conquest's here, and he starts fucking shit up, basically. His classic MO. He comes in and takes over Canfield's body, and basically reveals to Joseph, "Oh, you fucked up now."
Yeah, well, because he didn't fulfill the promise of watching Canfield die, because Canfield's kind of not dead.
Canfield didn't die, and Joseph definitely didn't get a chance to watch it.
Yes, and so Conquest offers him an out, basically saying, you can be forsworn, which is obviously really bad because you're vulnerable to everything that can kill a normal human and another. Or Conquest will basically take him under his wing and, I guess, empower him separately so that he has the ability to, still exist, basically. But obviously that comes at the cost of serving Conquest.
Of being owned by Conquest. Not just being owned by Conquest, but you and all your descendants from the point that they learn, from the point that they awaken, being at Conquest's service.
Yeah, which is definitely the point where you're like, okay, yeah, 100% this is Fel's ancestor, if you didn't suspect it already. But I love this bit just before Conquest sort of actually binds him, where there's bits where Conquest basically says, prove me wrong, like show me that there's a path where you're not forsworn, and I'll actually help you do it, which really, to me, conveys the sense of how defeated Joseph is even more, because Conquest offering to help shows how confident he is that there is no way for you to help. So it's even more of a sort of slam on any hope Joseph might have had.
It also feels like Conquest is like genuinely trying to offer him a way out here, because he knows there isn't one, and he knows that will make the binding that much more powerful. Like, the fact that it's so unquestionable, the fact that he gives him the chance twice for an out, it really just like the binding is it seems very, final.
Yeah, it's a very Conquest as well to really just unnecessarily remind you how much he's won by, And then I love sort of how this whole sort of segment of the chapter ends, because there's this little twist of the knife. When he agrees to be bound by Conquest, he has that moment of, I'm kind of serving Canfield now, which obviously doesn't gel with him. But that pales in comparison to what happens afterwards when Courtney, I'm pretty sure is her name, the girl who he's done all of this to rescue, basically comes down and is like, I didn't want your help. Which is brutal. He says this is the point where he's lost, and again, this is something Conquest promised him, that he gets to marry Courtney, and now you see that's probably not even a good thing. So there's no winning here.
Yeah, we jump forward in time and we see how unhappy their relationship ends up being. Courtney has, in a way, Joseph has also made Courtney be bound by this, right? Because Canfield says protect Courtney, and the way that the way that Conquest does this is by marrying her to Joseph, which is like, seems like not something that she even really wanted.
It's definitely not in the spirit of what Canfield wanted either, considering he died trying to prevent exactly this.
Yes. Conquest really capitalizes on this situation that he finds himself in. So we jump forward in time and we see an older Joseph abusing his son Matthew. Basically saying a series of incredibly horrible things to him in an argument here.
Yeah, well, he's basically everything that he was acting like Canfield was. Like, he immediately comes across as your kind of, in fiction we've seen other abusive, drunk fathers before, and that's very much the role he's sort of filling to a T, which in retrospect works, because we sort of find out that it's mostly put on. This is all a ploy to make Matthew so miserable he'll run away, which is...
Yeah. Or kill Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, it's a plan.
And it almost works. It's close.
Yeah, but it again, it's so packed because this works fantastically on a reread. Reading all of the things that Joseph says to Matthew, you can see the genuine truth hidden behind it. Like, I pulled out this one line where Joseph says, I have never been more disappointed than when I first set eyes on you, which... is obviously meant to be offending Matthew, but you can read that from Joseph's genuine feelings, which is like, having a son and knowing that he'd end up in Conquest's control, like, would have been very disappointing.
Yeah.
So, I guess I love how much the meaning of text can change based on your context, and that's something Pact plays with really well, as we've seen multiple times already.
Yeah. So Matthew pulls out Joseph's gun, points it at him, and Joseph tries to kind of bait him into pulling the trigger, but he doesn't. Matthew says he'll kill him after he gets the books on being a practitioner. He touches a book, and Conquest shows up, and reveals, "Hey, you're now bound to serve me." And Joseph obviously is very distraught by this. It's rough. It's really rough.
It's so tragic because essentially Joseph did a bunch of really horrible stuff to everyone he loves to try and hopefully make something good happen, and it didn't work, so it was all for nothing, and that just sucks for everyone.
Yeah.
Except Conquest.
Except Conquest. Yeah, for Conquest, this is a very happy progression. So we jump forward again. We jump forward to Matthew, now older, talking to Isadora, actually, to kind of seek confirmation on a plan that he's been cooking up. He married his wife knowing that she would be unfaithful and hoping that the children that she bore wouldn't end up being his.
It's a pretty good plan.
Another pretty good plan, yeah. They're creative, these Atwells.
I'd argue it's a lot better than his father's. I guess his father didn't have the freedom to pick an unfaithful wife, but it's actually, I quite liked seeing Isadora in a setting where she wasn't trying to kill people.
Isn't it fun?
I find it very interesting, and I have a feeling this is, later in the chapter we hear about how Fel and his mother are expecting some other players to make their plays while all this stuff's going on with Blake, and I have a feeling Isadora was going to be one of them anyway, and this almost confirms it to you, just reminding you Isadora exists in the story.
Yep. Oh yeah, and that she clearly is talking to Matthew here in a framing of, we both kind of want to fuck over Conquest.
Yeah, she's very much, it's the same vibes she gives off in the current day, which is she's not really in a spot where she wants to outwardly act against him, but she's happy to help people undermine him, except Blake.
Yeah. A fun little beat is that we find out that Matthew picked an unfaithful wife who was a skilled enchantress. And actually, when I wrote this, I was like, oh, this makes me really think she's a Duchamp. And I forgot that that's explicitly confirmed, basically, later on. I just think that's a hilarious little bit of, like, his unfaithful wife also just happens to be a Duchamp.
Yeah, I mean, seemingly you can't go 30 meters in southern Ontario without running into someone who's married a Duchamp woman and put her in a powerful position. They're everywhere.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Isadora says to him, it gives him a little spiel about fate, which is very in character for her, and says to him, no, fate has fucked with you. Your wife's children are going to be yours, unfortunately.
Yeah, which, he's going to be one of the first people in history to be really disappointed to hear that his spouse hasn't been cheating on him enough.
Well, I actually think my interpretation of this is that she has, but just due to fate / unluckiness, the kids that she's going to have are his and not kids that she may have had with whoever else.
Well, no, but that just means she needed to be more unfaithful.
That's true. Yeah, I guess she should have been even less faithful than she was.
It's really hard to hear that because I just thought this was such a good plan. Then Isadora just shuts it down so finally. Like, there's no, from either of them, sense that she might be wrong. It's just immediately like, yep, it's not going to work. And so I guess he's back to the drawing board.
Yeah, back to the drawing board. We jump forward again. And now we're finally seeing our main man, Fel, the third in line, who is kind of leaving Blake as Blake goes to fight the Erasure Demon.
Yeah, and, we get to see Blake from Fel's perspective, and he's not looking good, as we expected. And we find out later that Fel's actual name is Malcolm. I guess Fel is just his, cape name, I guess.
Yeah, or like a title, maybe, that is... potentially Joseph and Matthew and Malcolm were all just called Fel by Conquest.
Yeah, it could be a title. Yeah.
So there's a quote that I want to pull out here because it's going to be relevant to something that we were planning on talking about anyway. Where Fel is observing Blake as he heads in. The little familiar had taken to the air, circling around a few times, while 3 maimed goblins with chains around their necks trudged behind, dragging bundles of halogen lights and wires. Actually, it has only just occurred to me what the halogen lights and wires there are for.
I'm so bummed that didn't work. That was my favorite one of the plans.
I completely forgot that he actually did try neon lights after Fel explicitly calls it tacky. That's classic.
Yeah, it's good. But yeah, so the reason we brought this up is because some of the discussions around 5.6 that we had led to some great comments that we got on Reddit and in our Discord that we really wanted to bring up because it recontextualizes so much of what we've been talking about the last few chapters.
Yeah.
So the first one was from Wildbow, who kind of mentioned to us that the hyena was stated to have had like goblin minions, and then we never saw them, and that's basically what we're seeing here, and what we saw from Blake's perspective when the goblin like bits were in his field of view. Which just it was so well set up, and all the hints were there. You just have to put them together. It's really well done.
Yeah, I have to say, I think I kind of understand the interpretation that seeing it actually spelled out like this kind of takes away from it a bit, but I think there's so much going on in these stories. I personally completely forgot about the goblins, and I don't think I even like when we were rereading it. This is the first time all these pieces kind of fell into place for me, right? Just because when you're reading it, when you're binging it, or even as it's coming out, you
don't always stop enough to really appreciate it.
Yeah, and so I understand, from a story writing perspective, if this was a novel, I would say we probably don't need the explicit confirmation here, but because of the serial format, I think it just makes sense to make sure that people kind of get those pieces put together.
Yeah, because I definitely think I probably am in the camp. It blew my mind so much when Walbo mentioned this to us before I'd read 5.x, and because of the sort of way it had been done, and I did feel a little bit that just sort of seeing them from Fell's perspective or from the third person or whatever the reason is that it's remembered here kind of detracted from it. But I do also think that almost nobody, we didn't even really put it together until we saw them here. It was probably necessary. It's just still a shame that it had to be spelled out for us, I guess.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about more of the retrospective implications that this has in a bit, but I do think there's an interpretation of people reading the story who see some of the things that we're about to talk about and think, oh, this is an indication of a story that doesn't make sense, right? Like, oh, Blake beat the hyena really easily, or oh, Blake decided to fight the erasure demon when he shouldn't have. Stuff that we were kind of hinting at in our read through, right? Like, why is Blake so intent on doing this? And obviously, we kind of now see the pieces fall together that it's because the way we see it isn't the way it actually unfolded. But without this explicit confirmation, I think it would be a lot more possible that people would go, oh, this just doesn't kind of make internal sense.
Yeah, it'd be way easier to miss, absolutely. And so, I guess we'll just take a minute or two now to bring up some of the other points people made after Wildbow told us about the hyena's minions and how, it became clear that Blake had co-opted them into helping him. So we got a comment from Matt Freeman, who, of course, most listeners here will know as the guy who came onto Media MD about a month ago and recommended Pulp Fiction.
Yep. Top of the IMDb list there.
And he mentioned the moment that we called out at 5.6, where Blake is just suddenly standing there and is like, "Hey, this was a fucking awful idea." We kind of made fun of him for just having that realization there, but Matt points out that was probably the point where all the ideas he did have had finally been erased, and he finally caught up to the level we were on, having not seen them up till now. So we were already thinking you don't have any good ideas, and now that they've all been erased, he's finally at that point too. So it wasn't as sudden a realization for him because, it was just that his other memories had been getting erased.
Yeah, I want to jump onto this one as well and say that this probably also implies that we, and I hate to say it, might have been a bit unfair to Blake in 5.5 when we were talking about the car trip and how he coerces Rose into agreeing with him.
Absolutely.
What actually happened there is he had more than 3 ideas, and we only saw the 2.5 that he ended up with, I suppose.
Yeah, well, and because I did go back and sort of skim it, and there are bits where the numbers as they're counting to 3 don't quite add up, and it's not really explained, and it's because we're missing segments of the conversation.
We're missing at least the goblins and the halogen lights. That Fell calls very tacky.
And so we did have people on both on Reddit and in our Discord actually call us out on with that in mind, yeah, you're right. We were probably a bit harsh on Blake in the car ride. In retrospect,
I don't
now
know.
that we know, I mean, definitely the version we saw, I think we were fair to him, but now we know that that probably isn't a fair version of events. So yeah,
And for all we know, I mean, really, we can't be sure that anything we've seen in the story up till now is 100% right? And so maybe Blake is just a really good friend to Rose and never breaks any of his promises, and we're just getting the bad version of it.
okay. I don't think the Erasure Demon was that thorough.
Oh, yeah. The Erasure Demon really just wanted to fuck with Blake and Rose's dynamic.
No, I do really like that most of these companions who seemingly died were the hyena stuff, because it would and this is something other science fiction and that sort of stuff has done that kind of peeves me, is when you rewrite the history of the story that much, it can kind of undercut the value of the previous section, and so really seemingly most of what Blake lost was recently acquired allies, which I quite like, because I think, yeah, it doesn't really undermine everything we've seen in like arcs 2 and 3. Like if we'd known that there was a companion he'd had up until like for the whole story that he'd lost, I would have felt like that took something away from the whole story up until now and Blake's achievements up until now. So I'm glad that it's a bit more muted than that, but still we get that effect of having lost companions.
Yeah, all we really know is, I mean, you know, the hyena fight, obviously there's a point where Blake suddenly is like, yeah, we're going to beat the hyena now, and it kind of is a very quick turn. Obviously that makes more sense if we now have these goblin minions that have been co-opted along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think going that far back totally feels fair, but if it had gone all the way back to the start of the story, it would have felt a little bit undercutting to me, to the whole rest of the story.
Thinking about this now, are there any things in Arc 5 in the police station that feel off? Because when I think about things that felt off, it's the quick turnaround on the hyena fight, and the reason that Blake went into the Erasure Demon to start with, right? Those are the 2 points where I think we definitely know something's going on here. I can't think of anything in the police station arc that made me feel like, oh, there was additional work going on here, which probably means that the goblins were locked up or whatever, not available to him at that point.
No, presumably they didn't go to jail with him and he had to go and fetch them like on the way, and he's just forgotten that whole like bit where they went to go meet up with them.
Yeah. So Fell leaves Blake and his goblin best friends, to go and basically prepare to think about how he can resist conquest. He's kind of thinking about how Blake represents a way for conquest to build up power, where Fell and his family have been trying to slowly drain power from conquest. And Fell is kind of thinking about how can I fuck with Blake to stop conquest from becoming more powerful within the limitations of being bound to conquest.
Yeah, and sort of throughout this, we're getting sort of sprinkled out these little ways that Fell's family has been undermining conquest, like slowly. Like they fulfill his requests, but they try to do it in such a way that it doesn't quite get him as much power as it could or something. So slowly he's been kind of weakening through their efforts is basically the idea.
We explicitly, Fell calls out how his dad was given an order by conquest that he didn't want to follow, and did it so badly that conquest lost power and a rival lord gained power.
Well, and the dad died, yeah.
And the dad died, yes. Suicide by order.
Yeah, talk about malicious compliance.
Yeah. Which, yeah, man, that's such a tragic ending to... fuck, man. The story of these Atwells is really just rough.
Yeah.
As Fell's driving, we get more multiple beats of him speeding. He does 90 in a 50 zone, which is insanely speeding. He does a 60-minute drive in 39 minutes. It's sort of like, these are crazy speeds.
Yeah, but it's interesting because before he's been speeding just to be reckless, whereas here there's much more of an undercurrent of, you know, he's rushing to get home. Like there's a purpose as well as the recklessness this time. Yeah.
There's a quote that I want to pull out as what a thing Fell thinks as he's driving back, which to me is like a very important idea for the chapter. Fell thinks Fell had little pity for those who'd been doomed by circumstance. And this to me is the key thing that is trying to be conveyed by 5.x is Fell himself is fucked by circumstance, and Blake is fucked by circumstance, and, you know, that sucks for Blake, and Fel kind of recognizes that, but it's unforgivable for Blake to give Conquest power. So, despite the fact that it's not his fault, Fel knows it's not his fault. He can't have compassion for him. He has to act on it.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, he's so busy being fucked by fate that he doesn't really have space to empathize with other people who are going through the same sort of thing, which isn't great, but it's understandable.
Yeah, and even more than that, I'd say Fel and his family have, by circumstance, had to devote their entire lives to trying to weaken Conquest. Like, that's just the lot they're dealt, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, sorry, Blake, but I'm not going to give up literally my life's purpose just for you. Like, you're not important than me and my children and my niece and my parents and everybody that I have loved and will love,
Yeah, exactly.
So Fel makes it home in a nice tight 39 minutes, and we meet his niece and his mother. And his niece is young, hasn't yet been awakened, and it's clear that Fel is trying to keep her from becoming awakened.
Yeah, well, it really humanizes him a lot more. Like, seeing this niece who he's essentially, become stepfather of since his brother killed himself, maliciously complying with Conquest's requests as well, as is the family tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it really it gives you that sense that he's got something to lose,
Yeah, and the niece kind of goes to bed, and Fel and his mother, Jacqueline.
I thought Jacqueline was the friend of the niece at whatever castle she went to.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. We get so many hits about this castle. I have a feeling that's maybe another thing that's going to be a thing. I don't know. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. Maybe I'm just trying to grab onto any potential hint and just say that's a thing.
So Fel and his mother start talking about Blake and what will happen if Blake fails, or what happens if Blake is beholden to Conquest. And his mother kind of makes some interesting points here.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially they do some theory crafting. But
classic.
They know what they're talking about. And they basically piece together that apparently if Blake gets killed, that's a good thing for Rose, which is not at all the impression Rose and Blake seem to be operating on.
Yes.
So basically, Conquest does want Blake to die because that actually hands the reins of the Thorburn line properly over to Rose, who he currently has trapped. So
on a chain, yeah. If Blake dies, they seem to think Rose will basically supplant him. And if that happens, obviously Rose is properly chained, and so Conquest has a stronger hold over the power. And the mother kind of ends this thought by saying to Fel, I think it's in your best interests to be helping Blake here.
Finally, someone...
Yeah, we're getting closer to the Fel and Blake team up, which is very hype. So we get this fun line as well from where the mother says, my family doesn't particularly want him to do well here. My own feelings, well, I feel fairly lukewarm about my family's wishes, given how things have played out in the last decade or two. Saying my family doesn't particularly want him being Blake, him to do well here, is pretty strong confirmation that the mother is a Duchamp, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting as well because, like, we've had Sandra's interlude, and we know that Sandra was with Jeremy, like, actively plotting against Conquest for years, and, now she's seemingly the head of the household, so that was a somewhat central operation that the Duchamps were running. But it turns out the whole time, meanwhile, they had like this lady here, sort of really in Conquest's camp. So I can see why she's pretty bitter, because it seems like at some point they more or less abandoned her and focused everything on Sandra and Jeremy.
Well, that didn't go so well either, apparently.
I could see why she's kind of like, well, stuff them.
The Duchamps seem to be in the business of trying to fuck over Conquest and not being successful. So this conversation kind of starts to wind down when Conquest tugs on Fel, and Fel is pulled to the tower. Conquest gives Fel a few instructions, and Fel leaves to kind of pick up Blake when he notices Rose has also been pulled into Conquest's tower. And Conquest starts getting her to tell him about what they're planning, and Fell advises her it's easier if she just obeys. At which point she basically spills the beans on everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real like, oh no moment.
Yeah.
Just because she says, she tells him about Pose as timer and
Yeah.
about the hyena and the Knights of the Basement. And I mean,
Yeah.
God, I hope this is something where Rose, there's more to Rose's plan or whatever. But I'm not betting money on that. Let's just say,
it doesn't
but
feel like it, does it? It feels pretty tragic. It feels like Rose is broken, is beaten.
Yeah, and obviously Blake by proxy.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, and I mean, I guess I noticed that the next arc is called Subordination, which bodes not well at all. So, yeah, God, I can't wait to see what happens going forward.
Yeah, we'll see. So, that's where Arc 5 ends, though. It ends with Rose, with there being about 2 hours until Pose is freed, and Rose revealing what they've been planning to Conquest.
Which was, yeah, I mean, surprise was really the only element in their favor, so.
Yep. And now, I mean, now Blake's gonna go in thinking, alright, I've got a plan. But obviously the surprise has now become Conquest's weapon. That's the end of Arc 5, Conviction. And so let's kind of chat a bit about Conviction here. What does it mean? What are the meanings of conviction that we think of running through this through this chapter? Obviously, the obvious one is Blake spends a lot of this chapter inside a police station trying to avoid a conviction. That's really the surface layer. Not much really to say about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair bit of people getting forsworn going around in this, which you could say is akin. You're being convicted by the spirits.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'm reaching there, but there is this sort of sense of people falling into punishments, sort of spread throughout this arc. Evan just agreed to be Blake's familiar, which I guess we'll see how that turns out. But that might be a conviction of its own kind, potentially.
Yes. So the other meaning of conviction, the one I think we really want to talk about here is certainty.
Yeah.
And I one of the meanings that I like from this is we were talking about Rose and Blake in that car arc, the retconned car trip, that they were both so stubborn, right? I think this is one of the parts of the chapter that I really like, is exploring what it looks like when it's Blake without Rose, Blake with Evan, and then putting Blake and Rose against, in air quotes, against each other. I mean, the fact that I can even say they're against each other is kind of wild when they're so clearly on the same team. Having the dynamic there play off and seeing how stubborn they are.
Yeah, I agree, and that sort of ties into the next point, I think, which is, and we talked about this a lot in the first half of the arc, but 4.x really left us with this idea of Diabolus taking the easy way out, and this arc has really been defined by Blake refusing to do that and having the conviction to try and do things properly, sacrificing himself rather than taking the easy way, and that takes a certain amount of stubbornness that he obviously shares a bit with Rose. And
this is kind of where we get to the implications of this, right? Because I think the theme of this arc is Blake is self-sacrificing. He's so certain in the way of, he's convinced, he says with a lot of conviction, the right way to do things is for me to be self-sacrificing, right? I bleed myself out. I don't call the lawyers to take that easy way out. I don't do any of this stuff. It's all about me sacrificing myself to make this play. And the problem is, though, he's not... when you're bound to Rose and Evan in the way that he is, you can't make this sacrifice play because it's so selfish, right? Obviously, we know that there's a little bit more going on there now with 5.x, but Blake is so willing to throw himself under the bus, and that, in his mind and in Rose's mind and in Evan's mind, if he does that, that's gonna fuck with all of them. That's gonna fuck with Rose, with Evan, with everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Like, Blake's conviction, for lack of a better
Yep.
word.
There is no better word. It's a great title.
To just push through no matter what the obstacles or how terrible the odds. Seemingly, like he just keeps moving forward or trying to move forward. And yeah, I think that's really what carries this arc together, and that sort of ends. 5.6 ends with him finally going, no, like I need to slow the hell down for a second, and that's when he obviously leaves the building. But the arc is very much defined by Blake constantly pushing forward.
Yeah, I think this chapter 5.6 is one of my favorite chapters in the entire story. 5.x as well is very, very on point. We're getting into the parts of the story that really, really resonate with me, and I'm excited to kind of keep continuing and seeing where it goes next.
I mean, me too. It's funny because I remember when we started Arc 4 and I knew Arc 4 was a long arc. I was like, oh, okay, we'll do the Toronto arc. That's fine. And you kept telling me we're probably going to be here a while, and I guess now we're heading into.
I don't know why you think we're going back to Jacob's Bell ever.
Okay, I still think that, but I am starting to question when it's going to happen. I definitely thought Toronto was going to be a 1, maybe 2 arc thing, but it doesn't seem like we're done here at all.
Yeah, I like that we're seeing the tendrils of Jacob's Bell becoming more evident in Toronto as well, right? Primarily through the Duchamps, but through the Behaims as well. And I'm excited for those stories to converge a bit more. If they do, we'll see, I suppose. And, no spoilers.
No, there have been so many ties to Jacob's Bell expressed in Toronto. They're very interwoven. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's the end of our discussion of 5.x, though. These episodes are getting longer and longer, Elliot. What are we doing?
Yeah. Hopefully the next chapters get simpler and shorter.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure the stories we've passed the confrontation now. Blake's gonna go to Conquest, get subjugated, subordinated, and then it'll just be short chapters of him reading out different demon names, I guess. So thanks for joining us for our discussion of Arc 5 and Chapter 5.x. If you have any thoughts on this chapter or on the arc as a whole, feel free to leave them in our discussion thread, which you can find in the episode description down below.
Yes, and if you want to get in touch with us in another way, you can find us on Twitter at MediaMD Podcast.
Yes, or if you want to get in touch with us in another way, you can head to our website, which is duffmedia.com. We're a proud member of the Duff Media Network, and there are a bunch of great shows on there that you can check out if you head to that website. Yeah, and of course, if you want to support us and the rest of the shows on the Doof Network, head to patreon.com/doofmedia. You get a bunch of cool perks for helping us out. This very chapter, we kind of made reference to some of the awesome discussions that was happening once we found out the kind of twist about these goblins that were eaten by So to participate in some of those discussions, if you back us on Patreon, at I think any of the tiers, you get access to our Patreon-only Discord, where we talk about all kinds of things, all the Wildbow story goodness, but also miscellaneous things like the 2019 Marble Olympics is a hot topic at the moment.
I don't want to talk about that.
That's for our other show. While you're on Patreon, you should also check out Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow. He obviously creates all these cool stories and is so engaged with the community and does all these cool things with everybody. So definitely, if you haven't, please do go and support Wildbow making all this awesome content for us at his Patreon. Yeah. And so I guess apart from that, we'll see everyone on Monday the 29th for Chapter 6.1, New Arc. See you then.